Ethan Malone was used to noise and speed. Every morning he moved through traffic in his black car, checking messages and market graphs while sipping coffee. He was one of those people who made money faster than he could remember what for. His friends called him brilliant, but people who worked for him called him cold. He did not mind. He believed emotions made people weak. That afternoon, the sky over Los Angeles looked washed and pale, the kind that made people walk slower. Ethan had a meeting downtown, but the sea breeze tempted him to take a detour. He parked near a row of small shops close to the coast and began walking down the street. There were food stalls, painted signs, and street musicians playing quiet tunes. He rarely noticed such things, but something about the stillness caught him off guard. A small flower stall stood at the corner of the street. The stand was simple, just wooden crates, mason jars, and a faded umbrella. Behind it stood a young woman arranging flowers with careful hands. She wore a light blue shirt, and her dark hair was tied back loosely. The name written on the cardboard sign said Layla's Flowers. Ethan almost looked away, but she lifted her head and smiled politely. A quiet kind of smile that did not ask for attention. Ethan walked closer, partly out of boredom. He asked how much the flowers cost. Layla answered kindly, telling him the prices. How some flowers were cheaper because the season was almost over, and how the white lilies smelled sweet at night. Looked at her small stall and the slight trembling of her hands from the wind. Once he thought about how people like her worked all day for a few dollars. Ethan loved jokes that could remind him how far he had come from ordinary life. He tilted his head, looking at her with a half smile, and said, "Tell you what, sell me these flowers in Arabic, and I will pay you $100,000. A couple walking past laughed under their breath.
Ah!
It was the kind of thing a rich man would say for fun. He expected her to be confused, maybe even insulted. But Layla did not look embarrassed. She took a slow breath, set her scissors down, and looked at him calmly like someone studying a challenge instead of a man. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and soft, but her words rolled from her lips like wind touching a harp. He did not know Arabic, and therefore could not catch a single meaning. But something about the sound reached a place beyond sense. It felt like music that was in no hurry to end. The air around them seemed to grow still. Even the street noise faded as her words moved through space cleanly and clearly. Ethan stood quiet, his grin blurred. He had offered a game, but somehow she had turned it into something else, something he did not have control over. A group of teenagers nearby tried to record, thinking something famous might happen, yet even they stopped whispering. No one wanted to interrupt what they did not fully understand. When she finished, she smiled again, the same polite smile from before, but this time it held a kind of calm pride. Ethan managed to ask, "What did you just say?" She picked up a white rose, looked at it as if remembering a story, and answered in plain English, "I told you the story of this flower, where it came from, and why it means peace. My mother taught me that each language carries its own music. Sometimes people listen, sometimes they do not." Her words sank deeper than they should have. Ethan suddenly felt foolish for making the offer. He reached for his wallet but stopped halfway. Laughter felt wrong. The money looked heavy in his hand. Without thinking, he took one white rose from the bucket and held it up. She shook her head lightly and said, "Take it, no need to pay. Maybe one day you will know what the words meant." He nodded, unable to speak. He turned to leave, the flower in his hand, his throat tight with something he did not want to name. As he walked away, the street sound returned. People talked again, cars passed, music played, and the moment folded back into the city rhythm. But something inside him had changed shape. He sat in his car and stared at the rose. The air felt different, as if he had stepped out of a steel room without knowing he had been locked in it for years. He kept seeing her calm eyes, the way she stood unshaken in front of his careless challenge. He had gone looking for distraction, but had met something real instead. As the sun lowered across the sea, Ethan thought of the strange sentence he had spoken, the arrogance behind it, and the way her voice had melted it away. For the first time in a long time, he did not feel sure of himself. The flower rested on the passenger seat, the petals opening slowly as if breathing. Ethan stayed there for a while, letting the sound of her foreign words echo, even though he had no idea what they meant. Ethan could not stop thinking about the woman at the flower stall. That night, he sat in his large apartment with its glass walls and city lights, but everything felt distant. He tried reading emails, yet nothing stayed in his mind. The white rose Layla had given him sat in a glass of water on his kitchen table. It looked small against all the polished steel and marble around it, but it filled the place with quiet. He did not understand why her words still echoed within him. He told himself it was only curiosity. He searched online for Arabic phrases and listened to them over and over, trying to repeat the sounds. His voice came out wrong each time. He felt silly. But for the first time in years, he did not care about feeling silly. Something about her calm eyes and careful speech had made him want to learn. The next morning, he drove back to the same corner by the sea. Layla was already there, arranging new flowers. When she saw him, she smiled lightly, as if she had expected that he might return. He greeted her, bought a few daisies, and asked her what she had said the previous day. She told him again in English, explaining the words slowly. He listened, truly listened, his usual witty remarks gone. They began to talk more. Sometimes the wind made it hard to hear, so she would lean forward and repeat a word carefully. Ethan stayed longer than he meant to. At one point, a delivery truck honked, and the driver called out that he had to move his car. Ethan smiled and told him to wait. It surprised Layla that someone like him had time for small talk with a flower seller. She asked why he kept coming. He said he liked her stories. She did not believe him at first, but saw honesty flicker in his face. In the office later, Ethan's assistant noticed a change. He spoke more quietly, did not interrupt during meetings, and seemed distracted when people discussed money. He caught himself thinking that his employees looked tired, began leaving work earlier. While driving home, he passed bookstores and wondered which ones might have Arabic dictionaries. Days turned into a pattern. Ethan would stop by the stall every few mornings. Layla would hand him a flower, tell him its name in Arabic, and ask him to repeat it. He often failed, and she would laugh softly, correcting him. Her laughter reached him in ways success never had. She told him about her grandmother who had taught her both English and Arabic poems when she was little. Every poem, she said, carried two hearts. Ethan tried to imagine what that meant. A reporter from a local magazine eventually noticed the strange friendship and took a photo of them. When the picture appeared online, it spread quickly. People commented about how the millionaire was learning Arabic for a flower girl. Some said it was romantic, others said it was fake. Ethan ignored it. He went to see Layla as usual and told her about the article. She just shrugged and said her flowers still smelled the same no matter what people said. That day he helped her repaint the stall sign. His hands were not meant for paint, and he left streaks everywhere. Layla teased him and said he looked less like a businessman and more like a schoolboy. He laughed, not caring about the stain on his sleeve. A few people watched from across the street, curious. One old man nodded to himself and walked off smiling. When the sun started to sink, they sat on two crates beside each other. The sea breeze moved between them, soft and cool. Ethan told her he had spent most of his life trying to stay busy so he would not have to think deeply. She listened in silence. Then, she said, sometimes life leaves a gap that only quiet conversation can fill. He did not answer. He looked at her face and noticed that a small strand of hair had come loose and was dancing in the wind. For a second, everything around them seemed perfectly still again, just like the moment she had spoken in Arabic on the first day. That night, Ethan walked along the beach. Instead of driving home right away, carried a small bunch of flowers Layla had given him. The sand pressed cold under his shoes. He thought about money, success, and how easy it was to lose sight of small beauty when all of life was about numbers. He realized he wanted to understand her world, not from curiosity but from a need to feel something real. By the time he returned to his car, the city lights were flickering above the horizon. The flowers lay on the seat beside him, mixing their scent with salt air. He started the engine slowly and smiled to himself. The challenge that had once been a joke was now becoming a lesson, and he knew he was only at the beginning of it. Ethan woke up early now. He used to start his days with loud music and quick calls, but now he liked quiet. He brewed coffee, looked at the white rose that had dried on the shelf, and felt something calm in his chest. He did not understand love yet. He only knew that Layla's voice stayed with him even when she was not near. At work, he no longer felt alive. He sat in meetings about big deals and listened to people talk fast about profit. Their voices sounded far away, like noise through glass. He kept thinking of colors instead of numbers. He remembered how Layla's hands moved when she tied ribbons around bouquets, how she smiled when children walked by her stall. He wondered if happiness could exist in small places instead of climbing endless ladders. After finishing his work early, he drove again to the seaside stall. Layla was reading a book under the umbrella while the wind lifted the pages. Seeing her sitting there so peacefully made him forget his own name for a second. He greeted her and asked what she was reading. She showed him a short old book translated from Arabic to English. It was about letters exchanged between two poets. She said she liked it because they wrote about love without using fancy words, only simple ones. Ethan smiled and said he wished he could write like that. She said he could learn. And before he could answer, she opened a notebook and asked him to write one memory he liked most from his life. He stared at the empty page and realized he could not think of one that made him feel real. After a while, he wrote about his mother teaching him to ride a bike when he was 8. When he finished, Layla read it silently and handed him the notebook back. She said that memory had weight because it had truth, not money. He kept the notebook with him when he left. That night in his apartment, he read the page again. The words were simple but honest, and for the next few nights he wrote more. He wrote about moments he had not remembered in years. He wrote about the first time he saw snow, the smell of hospital floors when his father was ill, and how silence had become his habit after success came. The writing made him uneasy yet grateful. He realized that Layla was teaching him something deeper than a language. One morning he found her stall closed. A small paper sign said, "Back soon." He waited near the corner for more than an hour, then bought coffee from a shop nearby. She finally returned. She looked tired. She explained her grandmother was unwell. Ethan asked if she needed help. She smiled and said she just needed company. Without a plan, he followed her to a small house a few blocks away. There, he met the old woman, kind-faced and sharp-eyed, sitting near a window surrounded by potted plants. She spoke a few words in Arabic that he could not understand, but could feel were kind. Layla translated that her grandmother liked visitors who brought flowers, even imaginary ones. Ethan laughed and promised to bring real ones next time. He spent the afternoon helping place new soil in the garden and watched how Layla spoke gently to the plants. Her care for everything around her felt like a language he could almost understand. Over the next weeks, he visited both the stall and the house. Sometimes he read short sentences in Arabic from his phone and tried to repeat them. Layla corrected him, and they laughed. Once he brought a small potted plant as a gift. She said it was brave of him to buy something that could die if left uncared for. He replied that maybe that was why he liked it. She looked at him curiously, as if she could see the meaning behind his words. As seasons shifted, the sea wind grew colder. Ethan realized he anticipated each meeting with a kind of joy that made waiting harder. He began noticing small things he had once ignored, like the smell of oranges from passing fruit stalls and the way sunlight changed at different hours of the day. He wanted to tell these things to Layla every time they met. She listened with a warm half-smile, her eyes full of quiet understanding. One evening, the city lights came on early because of heavy clouds. The world felt gray and soft. Layla taught him how to say peace in Arabic. He repeated until he got the sound right. She clapped her hands lightly in surprise. That simple sign of approval felt better than any award he had ever earned. When he drove home that night, the notebook she had given him sat beside him, filled with small pieces of truth. He had started as a man chasing a story to impress himself, but now he found his heart opening in ways he did not plan. Understood now that her presence was not loud or dramatic. It grew quietly like roots beneath the earth. And though he could not name what was forming between them, he felt its weight and warmth shaping him from inside. The news about Ethan and Layla started to spread more than either of them expected. One morning, when Ethan walked down the street toward the stall, he noticed more people standing around taking photos. Some whispered his name and pointed. Layla looked uncomfortable but kept arranging the flowers. A girl asked if she could take a picture of them together. Layla hesitated, but Ethan gently said it was fine and smiled for the photo. After the girl left, he turned to Layla and said that people loved stories, even ones they did not fully understand. She answered that sometimes stories lose meaning when too many people try to own them. Ethan offered to help her paint a new sign again to make the stall look fresh. The old one had faded under the sun. He brought paint and a brush from his car, but this time he took his work seriously. Layla watched as he wrote the words slowly, his letters uneven yet careful. She said it looked perfect because it was human. A small crowd clapped as they finished. Someone whispered that the millionaire looked like a man who finally found peace. Over the next few days, Ethan started showing up earlier to help her set up the stall. He lifted boxes, wiped the tables, and carried buckets of water. Passersby who once saw him as a distant rich man now saw him laughing beside a street vendor. He began saying good morning to other stall owners too. Many days he arrived, still wearing his business clothes, his sleeves rolled up, his tie pulled loose. He did not seem to care about how anyone judged him. Layla's grandmother grew stronger, and sometimes she came to watch them from a bench nearby. She would wave and call out greetings in Arabic. Ethan waved back, though he did not always understand her words. Layla translated that her grandmother said, "He worked harder than a man who had everything." Ethan knelt down in front of her and told her through Layla that helping them gave him something money could not buy. The old woman smiled kindly and said that love often begins with work. Things around the city were shifting too. Customers now came not only for flowers but for conversation. Many wanted to hear Layla speak in Arabic after seeing videos online. Ethan made sure the crowd did not become too rough, asking people to be kind and let her work comfortably. When he saw her blush or lower her eyes, he would distract the crowd with a simple joke. Often about how terrible his flower tying skills still were. The crowd laughed, and Layla would glance at him with quiet gratitude. In the middle of all the attention, Ethan was learning small lessons. When someone dropped a coin on the ground, he bent to help pick it up. When a child tugged Layla's sleeve to ask about a red flower, he squatted and listened carefully to the answer. He noticed how every person who stopped at the stall carried a story of their own, small and simple yet full of life. The world he had built for himself before now seemed flat compared to the colors here. One evening, the sunset turned the sky into gold and pink. The stalls around began to close, and Layla's flowers caught the last light. She looked tired but happy. Ethan cleaned up the leftover petals and asked if she wanted to eat together. She stared at him for a long second, as if deciding something, then nodded. They walked to a small cafe nearby. They talked about simple things, about how the sea smelled different each week, and how she missed her mother's cooking. Ethan listened as she described the spices her mother used. Her words painted pictures inside his mind. During the meal, he confessed that he had read more about Arabic poetry. He said he still could not understand all the words, but the rhythm felt honest. Layla looked surprised, but touched. She said she could teach him a new poem every week, if he promised not to rush. He promised without hesitation. When he drove home that night, he opened the window and let the sea air fill the car. He passed tall buildings that once made him proud but now looked cold. His hand rested on the notebook beside him, the one Layla had given him. He thought of how their days had become a quiet routine that made sense even without promises. By the end of that week, Ethan found himself skipping another meeting. He sent his assistant instead and stayed at the stall to help Layla rearrange bouquets for a wedding order. While they worked, she quietly said, "You are different now." He laughed and asked if that was a good thing. She looked at him, eyes bright in the afternoon light, and said it was. The city did not stop watching them, but Ethan no longer noticed flashing cameras or curious smiles. What he saw was Layla beside him, steady and real. The sound of her laughter rose above the traffic noise. For the first time in his life, he did not feel the need to prove anything. There was peace in his silence, and the scent of her flowers had begun to linger in his thoughts like a song he never wanted to forget. Rain began to fall one afternoon without warning. Clouds had grown dark over the sea, and most vendors packed up early. Layla tried to cover her flowers with sheets of plastic, but the wind tore at them. Buckets tipped over as she hurried to save what she could. She was alone when the first heavy drops hit the ground. Ethan had been nearby at a meeting when he saw the storm. He left before it ended, grabbing his coat and running toward the street corner. People stared at him, a wealthy man rushing through puddles, but he did not care. When he reached the stall, Layla was fighting the wind, holding the umbrella with one hand and pushing boxes with the other. He stepped in beside her without a word, holding the umbrella over her head. She looked at him, surprised, then laughed in relief. The rain poured harder, and soon they were both soaked. Ethan helped her move the crates into the small space behind the stall where it was a little more sheltered. He found 2 plastic chairs and placed them under the umbrella. They sat, breathing heavily, water dripping from their clothes. Sound of rain filled the air. Layla handed him a paper cup of tea she had prepared earlier. It was cold now, but he drank it anyway. He looked at her and said he had left a conference filled with men arguing over numbers worth millions, and that it had felt empty compared to this small storm. She smiled and told him storms are also a kind of cleaning, that rain washes pride off people's faces. For a moment, they sat quietly. She looked around at the soaked street, then turned back to him and said that her grandmother used to say, "Difficult days test not the heart but the patience of it." Ethan asked about her grandmother again, and Layla said she had been a teacher once. She taught children that work done with kindness is never wasted. Layla said she missed her sometimes even when she was near because she was growing weaker with time. Ethan reached out and held her hand gently, not to comfort with words but just to be there. She did not pull away. The moment stayed still between them until the rain began to soften. When it stopped, the city air smelled fresh. The sky was still gray, but the stalls around them glistened. Together, they began fixing the stall again, setting the flowers upright and wiping the tables. He picked up a fallen rose and handed it to her. She looked at it and said quietly that he had already paid her in a way no one else ever had. He frowned slightly and asked what she meant. She said, "You learned to listen." Her words sank deep, and for a moment Ethan felt unable to speak. All he could do was hold that broken rose and look at her smiling face. He told her he once thought money could fix everything. Now he understood that some hearts only open when met with humility. She replied that hearts are like flowers too. They bloom when given sunlight and care. They finished cleaning in silence, but their eyes met often, each glance filled with quiet meaning. As evening came, he walked her home. The path was wet, and puddles glimmered under faint streetlights. When they reached her door, she turned and said, "Thank you for coming in the rain." He said he would have come even if there were a storm twice as strong. She smiled, wished him good night, and went inside. Stood for a while watching the small window light fade before walking back to his car. That night, he could not sleep. He sat beside the window in his apartment, thinking about the look in her eyes when she said he had learned to listen. The word listen sounded bigger than he had ever known before. He realized that for years he had only heard noise, not voices. He thought about how Layla never tried to impress anyone, yet brought out truth in everyone she met. By morning, he decided something. He called his office and told his assistant he would take some time off. When the assistant asked why, Ethan said he wanted to build something real. Then he spent the day writing notes and ideas in his notebook. He sketched a plan for a flower shop that could blend beauty from different cultures, a place where languages met across color and scent. Later that day, he returned to Layla's stall and showed her his ideas. She read them slowly, the wind tugging at the pages, and looked up at him. Her eyes softened.
Out.
She asked if he was serious about leaving his business world behind. He said yes. He wanted to start something that belonged to both of them. She stayed quiet, then nodded, and said she would think about it. As they watched the sunset, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. Layla stood beside him holding the repaired rose from earlier. The air was calm, and the sound of the sea reached them faintly. They both understood without saying it that something important had begun during that rain. Something warmer than ambition, and far more lasting than wealth.